The elevator doors slammed shut with a finality that made Jack Miller's heart sink. Of all the days to get trapped, it had to be today, his daughter's birthday. Jack checked his watch. 11:17. He'd promised Sophie he'd pick her up at noon for their special birthday lunch. 8 years old today. The thought of her waiting, checking the classroom clock as the minutes ticked by, made his chest tighten. 3 years since cancer took her mother, and he'd never once broken a promise to her. Not until today. Jack wasn't alone in the metal box suspended between the 32nd and 33rd floors of Horizon Tower. Standing across from him was Elizabeth Reynolds herself, the ice-cold CEO of Reynolds Development, which had acquired the building 6 months ago. Her designer suit remained unwrinkled despite the summer heat, her expression unreadable as she tapped impatiently on her phone. The diamond-studded watch on her wrist probably cost more than his annual salary. The ultimate visual contrast to his worn maintenance uniform, complete with tool belt and Reynolds Development ID badge that read Engineering Maintenance. The silence between them stretched like a taut wire. Jack shifted his weight, the tools on his belt clinking softly. He'd been heading down after fixing the air conditioning on the 37th floor, the third malfunction this week. Elizabeth had been heading to the executive parking garage, presumably for the board meeting everyone in the building had been whispering about. The vote that would determine if Horizon 2.0 would proceed, the project that would demolish his apartment building and hundreds of others in East Heights, displacing an entire community to build luxury condos and smart commercial space. Jack's fingers brushed the emergency phone panel. Any signal? No lights, no connection. He pulled out his cell phone. No service. Elizabeth's perfectly manicured fingers continued their frustrated dance across her phone screen. Any luck with the signal? Jack broke the silence, his deep voice filling the confined space. Elizabeth glanced up, seeming almost surprised that he had spoken. No, whatever's wrong with this elevator has killed the reception too. I suppose we'll have to wait for someone to notice we're missing. Jack nodded, swallowing the growing knot of anxiety. Sophie would be waiting, wondering why her dad hadn't shown up to take her for their special birthday lunch. At 8 years old, she was already too familiar with disappointment. Since her mother's death, Jack had worked tirelessly to be both parents, never missing a single special occasion. I need to make a call. Jack's voice was more urgent now. My daughter. It's her birthday today. Something in Elizabeth's expression shifted slightly, the corporate mask slipping for just a moment. How old? 8? Jack replied, surprised by her interest. I promised her lunch at her favorite place. She's been looking forward to it all week. Elizabeth nodded but said nothing more. Jack noticed her glance at the watch again. The timepiece's diamond bezel caught the emergency lighting, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the elevator wall. You have somewhere important to be too, I guess. Jack leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Board meeting, the final approval for the Horizon 2.0 project. Her voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone used to keeping emotions in check. $3 billion of investment rides on today's presentation. Jack felt his stomach tighten. Horizon 2.0, the massive redevelopment project that would demolish his apartment building and dozens of others in the neighborhood. The project that would force him and Sophie to leave the only home she'd known since her mother died. The only place where the memories of her mother still lived in every corner. That's the one that's going to tear down East Heights. Jack couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly. It's going to revitalize an underutilized area and create thousands of jobs and displace hundreds of families who can't afford to live anywhere else in the city. The words hung between them, heavy in the confined space. Elizabeth's perfectly composed facade cracked just slightly, a flash of something, irritation, guilt, crossing her features before she regained control. The project has been in development for years. The board votes today and construction begins next month. Her tone made it clear the matter was settled. Jack leaned back against the elevator wall, feeling the weight of helplessness. He'd fought against the development, attended community meetings, signed petitions, all for nothing. And now he was trapped in an elevator with the very person who held his family's future in her manicured hands. The minutes ticked by in uncomfortable silence. 10 minutes. 20. Jack tried the emergency phone again. Still dead. The building's much-touted smart system seemed remarkably dumb at the moment. Some smart building. He muttered the words under his breath, but they carried in the enclosed space. 3 years working maintenance here, and I've never seen so many system failures as in the past month. Jack's frustration was palpable. Elizabeth looked up sharply. What do you mean? Jack shrugged, gesturing to the control panel. Ever since the new AI system was installed to manage the building functions, we've had nothing but problems. Temperature control going haywire, security doors locking randomly, and now this. He gestured to the stalled elevator. That's impossible. Elizabeth's voice was firm, confident. The Horizon AI system was extensively tested. It's the cornerstone of the Horizon 2.0 project, a fully integrated smart environment that learns and adapts to its occupants. Jack couldn't help but laugh, the sound echoing off the metal walls. Well, it hasn't learned much yet. Last week, it flooded the entire 18th floor because it detected a phantom fire. 3 weeks ago, it trapped an elderly woman in the bathroom for 2 hours because it decided the door was a security threat. Elizabeth's brow furrowed, perfect makeup creasing slightly. Those reports never reached my desk. Would they have mattered if they had? The question slipped out before Jack could stop himself, sharper than he intended. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the power imbalance between them seemed to fade. They were just two people, trapped and frustrated in a metal box suspended hundreds of feet above the ground. Elizabeth broke the gaze first. Of course they would have. I don't launch faulty products. But you do launch products that destroy communities. The words hung in the air between them. Elizabeth's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, the elevator lurched violently, throwing them both off balance. Jack instinctively reached out, catching Elizabeth's arm before she fell. The lights flickered ominously, casting strange shadows across her suddenly alarmed face. What was that? The cool corporate detachment had vanished from Elizabeth's voice, revealing genuine fear. Jack steadied her, then moved to the control panel, the maintenance engineer in him taking over. I'm not sure, but I don't think we should wait to find out. He pried open the panel cover with a screwdriver from his belt, revealing a tangle of wires and circuits. You know how to do that? Elizabeth asked, watching as his hands moved confidently among the wires. I helped install it. Jack connected 2 wires and the elevator hummed to life momentarily before dying again. His fingers traced the circuit paths with practiced precision. Before I was just maintenance, I was an electrical engineer. Lost my position when my wife got sick. Couldn't manage the hours with a 5-year-old at home. Elizabeth was silent, watching him work. After a few moments, she asked quietly, "What happened to your wife?" Jack's hands stilled for a moment, the memory still raw even after 3 years. Cancer. It was quick. 6 months from diagnosis to... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I'm sorry. Elizabeth's voice was softer than he'd heard it before, without the practiced corporate polish. Jack nodded, returning to his work. His fingers reconnected a loose wire. Sophie barely remembers her mom now. Just impressions, really. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh. Elizabeth moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the complex wiring. That's why you can't leave your apartment? It's the last place where Sophie lived with her mother. He connected another set of wires. It's all she has left. His voice hardened again. But I guess that doesn't factor into your cost-benefit analyses. Elizabeth stepped back, crossing her arms. That's not fair. The redevelopment will bring economic growth, new housing, luxury housing. Jack interrupted without looking up from the panel. Not affordable homes for families like mine. There's a percentage allocated for affordable units. Elizabeth's voice had an edge of defensiveness. 15%. I've read the plans. Jack connected another wire and the elevator display flickered briefly to life, showing they were indeed stuck between floors. And affordable by whose standards? Not mine, not my neighbor's. Elizabeth fell silent, watching as he worked. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice softer. I grew up in public housing. Did you know that? Jack looked up, surprised by this personal revelation from the corporate ice queen. My mother cleaned office buildings at night, not unlike this one. Elizabeth's gaze was distant now, seeing something beyond the elevator walls. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I promised myself I'd build something better, something that would last. And this is it. There was a strange mixture of defiance and uncertainty in her voice. Pushing out working families to build luxury condos? Jack couldn't keep the bitterness from his tone. Elizabeth's eyes refocused on him, a flash of anger visible. It's more complicated than that. It always is for the people making the decisions. It's pretty simple for those of us living with the consequences. The elevator lurched again, dropping several inches before catching. Elizabeth gasped, instinctively grabbing Jack's arm. Her perfectly composed exterior cracked completely, revealing genuine fear beneath. "We need to get out of here." Her voice was urgent, the corporate mask gone entirely. Jack nodded, abandoning the control panel. "The emergency hatch. Help me reach it." Together, they managed to open the ceiling hatch. Jack hoisted himself up first, then reached down to help Elizabeth. The elevator shaft stretched above them, dimly lit by emergency lights that cast an eerie red glow over everything. The silence of the massive building was unnerving, broken only by their breathing and the occasional metallic creak of the suspended elevator. Now what? Elizabeth looked up at the seemingly endless shaft, her usually commanding voice small in the vast darkness. "Now we climb." Jack pointed to the maintenance ladder running along the wall. "It's not far to the next floor. We can pry the doors open from there." Elizabeth looked down at her pencil skirt and 4-inch heels, then back at the ladder. "I'm not exactly dressed for climbing." Jack couldn't help but smile despite the situation. Neither is the elevator in the mood for waiting. As if to emphasize his point, the car shuddered beneath them. Elizabeth kicked off her heels and hiked up her skirt. "Lead the way." They climbed in silence, the exertion making conversation difficult. Jack went first, testing each rung before signaling for Elizabeth to follow. The maintenance ladder was sturdy but narrow, forcing them to climb carefully in the dim emergency lighting. Jack could hear Elizabeth's controlled breathing below him, determined despite her obvious discomfort. When they reached the next floor's doors, Jack wedged his screwdriver into the seam and began to pry them apart. The metal resisted at first, then gradually yielded. "Why didn't you ever leave?" Elizabeth asked suddenly, her voice echoing in the shaft. "After your wife died. Why stay in a job beneath your qualifications?" Jack paused in his efforts, considering the question. Stability for Sophie, flexible hours, and honestly, I'm good at fixing things, always have been. The doors began to give way under his efforts. "Just wish I could fix what matters most." With a final push, the doors slid open enough for them to squeeze through. Jack helped Elizabeth onto the floor, then followed her out. They stood in an empty hallway, both breathing hard from the climb. "Thank you." Elizabeth smoothed her rumpled clothing, attempting to restore some semblance of her usual polished appearance. "For getting us out." Jack checked his watch and grimaced. "I need to call my daughter's school. I'm already an hour late." Elizabeth hesitated, then pulled out her phone, which now had reception. "Use mine." Jack made the call, explaining the situation to the school and promising to be there as soon as possible. When he handed the phone back, Elizabeth was watching him with an unreadable expression. "You're a good father," she said simply. "I try to be." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I should go, and you have your board meeting." Elizabeth glanced at her watch and sighed. "I've missed it. The vote will have happened without me." "I'm sorry," Jack said, and meant it despite everything. Elizabeth shook her head. "Don't be. Maybe it's for the best." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you show me?" "Show you what?" "The problems with the AI system. The real ones, not the sanitized reports I've been getting." Her expression was serious, intent. Jack stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why, Mom?" "Because if what you're saying is true, we're about to implement a fundamentally flawed system across an entire development. A $3 billion mistake." Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "And because I want to see what I'm destroying before I destroy it." Jack considered her request. His daughter was waiting, but there was something in Elizabeth's expression that hadn't been there before. A genuine openness, a willingness to listen that might never come again. "I need to pick up my daughter first. It's her birthday." "Of course," Elizabeth nodded. Then surprisingly, "May I come with you? We can talk on the way." The ride to Sophie's school was tense, filled with an awkward silence broken only by Jack's occasional directions. They were in Elizabeth's car, a sleek black luxury sedan that felt out of place in his working-class neighborhood. Jack had left his old pickup truck in the Horizon Tower garage, deciding it would be faster to let Elizabeth drive. Her driver had been dismissed with a quick phone call and a promise to call later. As they pulled up to the elementary school, Jack felt a strange uneasiness at the thought of these two worlds colliding. His simple life with Sophie and the corporate power that Elizabeth represented, the same power threatening their home. Sophie was waiting in the school office, her small backpack clutched to her chest, her eyes lighting up when she saw Jack. "Daddy, you came!" She launched herself into his arms, her blonde ponytail bouncing. "I knew you would." Jack hugged her tightly, guilt washing over him. "I'm so sorry I'm late, sunshine." Something happened at work. Sophie's bright blue eyes, her mother's eyes, shifted curiously to Elizabeth, who stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking distinctly out of place among the children's artwork and plastic chairs. "Who's she?" Sophie whispered, not quite quietly enough. "This is Miss Reynolds. She's—" Jack hesitated, unsure how to explain Elizabeth's presence. "I work with your father." Elizabeth stepped forward, extending her hand formally to the 8-year-old, who shook it with solemn importance. "I'm sorry I made him late for your birthday." Sophie studied Elizabeth with the frank curiosity of childhood, taking in the expensive suit and the diamond earrings that caught the fluorescent lighting. "Are you the boss lady Dad talks about? The one who wants to take our home?" Jack winced, but Elizabeth didn't flinch at the direct question. "I am, or I was. Your dad is helping me understand some things I didn't know before." Elizabeth's voice was gentler than Jack had heard it before, without the sharp corporate edge. Sophie continued her assessment, head tilted to one side. "Did you get stuck in the elevator with my dad?" "We did, and he was very brave and very smart. He got us out." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to Jack for a moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. "Dad's the best at fixing things." Sophie's pride was evident in her voice. "He fixed Mrs. Wilson's car when it wouldn't start, and he fixed Billy's bike chain, and he fixed our whole apartment when the ceiling leaked." Jack felt a flush of embarrassment at his daughter's enthusiastic endorsement. "Sophie, Ms. Reynolds is very busy. We should let her get back to work." "Actually," Elizabeth interrupted, "I was hoping you both might show me something. Your father mentioned some problems with the systems at Horizon Tower that I should see. But it's your birthday, Sophie, so it's your decision. We could do it another day." Sophie considered this with the serious deliberation of a child granted unexpected decision-making power. She looked at her father, then back at Elizabeth. "Can we still have my birthday lunch after?" "Of course," Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "Then okay." Sophie slipped her small hand into Jack's. "But I get to choose the restaurant." Jack couldn't help but smile at his daughter's negotiating skills. "Deal." As they walked back to the car, Sophie chattering about her morning at school, Jack caught Elizabeth watching them with an expression he couldn't quite define, something between curiosity and a deeper emotion he wouldn't have expected from the corporate executive. The next hour was surreal. Jack led Elizabeth through the service areas of Horizon Tower, places that executives never saw: the mechanical rooms, the server farms, the network hubs that controlled the building's smart functions. Sophie followed along, occasionally asking perceptive questions that made Jack swell with pride. She'd inherited his technical curiosity, along with her mother's compassion. In the central control room, Jack pulled up logs that had been hidden from executive reports, revealing pattern after pattern of dangerous malfunctions. "The AI is programmed to prioritize cost efficiency above all else." He pointed to code on the screen. "It's making decisions that look good on paper but create real-world hazards." Elizabeth leaned closer, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "This is nothing like what I was shown in development meetings, because no one wanted to tell the boss that her pet project had fundamental flaws." Jack's voice was blunt. "The same way no one wanted to tell you what Horizon 2.0 will really do to the neighborhoods it's replacing." Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, processing everything she'd seen. She turned to Sophie, who was spinning slowly in an office chair nearby. "Sophie, what would you think if I told you that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even when they're trying to do the right thing?" Sophie stopped spinning, considering the question with childlike seriousness. "My teacher says mistakes are how we learn. Did you make a mistake?" Elizabeth nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "I think I did. A big one." Jack watched this exchange, surprised by Elizabeth's candor with his daughter. It was so at odds with the corporate persona he'd seen in community meetings, the unyielding face of progress that wouldn't be deterred by humanitarian concerns. Dad says when you make a mistake, you have to fix it and then make sure it doesn't happen again. Sophie's child wisdom was delivered with the absolute certainty of the young. Elizabeth's gaze shifted to Jack. Your dad is a very wise man. I think I need to fix my mistake too, but I'm going to need his help to do it. Jack felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mixture of hope and disbelief. Was this the same woman who had dismissed community concerns at every town hall? Who had characterized their neighborhood as underutilized rather than beloved? Show me more, Elizabeth said quietly. I want to see everything. They spent the next hour going through the building, Jack pointing out jury-rigged fixes that maintenance staff had implemented to work around the AI's limitations. In the security office, he showed her footage of residents trapped in their apartments when the system had malfunctioned during a power fluctuation. These aren't just inconveniences, Jack explained as Sophie drew on a notepad at a nearby desk. These are safety issues, and your Horizon 2.0 plans call for an even more integrated system with fewer human overrides. Elizabeth's phone rang, interrupting them. She answered, listening briefly before saying, I understand. I'll be there shortly. Hanging up, she turned to Jack. That was my assistant. The board approved of the project in my absence, but they need me to sign off on the final documents. Jack felt his heart sink. Despite everything he'd shown her, nothing would change. Of course they did. Elizabeth studied him for a moment. I'd like you to come with me. What? To the meeting? Jack couldn't hide his surprise. I want you to show them what you've shown me. Elizabeth's voice was determined, her decision made. Jack shook his head, gesturing to Sophie. I can't. My daughter. We'll bring her with us, Elizabeth said decisively. She can wait in my office during the meeting. I have a couch, a TV, snacks. It'll be fine. Why would you do this? Jack searched Elizabeth's face, looking for the catch, the corporate angle. Elizabeth's expression softened slightly. Because you were right. I've been so focused on building something impressive that I forgot to make sure it was good. She checked her watch. We don't have much time. Will you help me? Jack hesitated, torn between skepticism and a flicker of hope. He looked at Sophie, who was watching their exchange with curious eyes. Let's go. The corporate headquarters of Reynolds Development occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. Jack had never been inside, though he'd participated in protests on the sidewalk below. The contrast with his usual workplaces was stark. Everything here spoke of money and power, from the marble lobby to the hushed carpeted executive floor where Elizabeth led them. In her spacious corner office, Elizabeth quickly arranged for Sophie to be comfortable. A couch was cleared of files, a tablet was produced with games and movies, and a sympathetic assistant was dispatched to bring snacks and drinks for the birthday girl. Sophie, Jack knelt to his daughter's level. I need you to stay here while Miss Reynolds and I go to a meeting. It might take a while. Will you be okay? Sophie nodded, already exploring the tablet. Is Ms. Reynolds going to help save our house? The question, asked with childlike directness, hung in the air between them. Jack looked up at Elizabeth, unable to answer. I'm going to try, Sophie. Elizabeth's voice was solemn, a promise being made. Your dad is going to help me convince some other grown-ups. As they walked toward the boardroom, Jack felt increasingly out of place. His worn work boots were silent on the plush carpet, but his maintenance uniform stood out sharply against the backdrop of corporate luxury. He was acutely aware of the curious, sometimes dismissive glances from employees they passed. They're not used to seeing the people who actually make their buildings run. Jack's comment was quiet, meant only for Elizabeth. Maybe that's part of the problem, she replied, surprising him again with her candor. She stopped just before the boardroom doors, turning to face him. Jack, what I'm about to do could cost me my job. The board isn't going to like hearing that our cornerstone technology is fundamentally flawed, or that our development plans need to be reconsidered. I need you to be absolutely certain about everything you're going to tell them. I am, Jack's voice was firm. I wouldn't risk my community on anything less. Elizabeth nodded, her decision made. Then let's do this. The boardroom fell silent as Elizabeth entered with Jack in tow. A dozen men and women in expensive suits sat around a massive table, tablets and folders open before them. At the head of the table sat an older man with silver hair and a commanding presence. Harold Reynolds, Elizabeth's father and the company founder, Jack realized with a start. Elizabeth, At last, Harold's voice held a mixture of relief and irritation. We were beginning to worry. The board has already voted to approve Horizon 2.0, but we need your signature on the final documents. Elizabeth remained standing, her posture straight, her voice steady. Before I sign anything, there's something the board needs to see. She gestured to Jack. This is Jack Miller. He's a maintenance engineer at Horizon Tower, and he has information that directly impacts our development plans. The room remained silent, but Jack could feel the tension rising. A man halfway down the table, younger, with sharp features and an expensive watch that rivaled Elizabeth's, spoke first. Is this a joke, Elizabeth? You bring a maintenance worker to a board meeting? Richard. Elizabeth's voice carried a warning edge. Mr. Miller was previously a senior electrical engineer before personal circumstances required a career change. More importantly, he has direct knowledge of serious flaws in our AI system, the same system we plan to implement across Horizon 2.0. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Harold raised a hand for silence, then fixed Jack with an appraising stare. Mr. Miller, what exactly are you alleging? Jack stepped forward, conscious of his work clothes, the dirt under his fingernails, the tool belt still hanging from his waist. But he also knew the systems better than anyone in this room, and that knowledge gave him confidence. Your AI system prioritizes cost efficiency over human safety. It's making decisions that endanger people in the name of saving money. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. I've documented multiple incidents over the past 3 months. Floods, lockdowns, system failures that have put people at risk. The logs show these weren't random glitches. They're the result of fundamental flaws in how the AI weighs decisions. The man called Richard scoffed openly. This is absurd. The system has been extensively tested. If there were serious flaws, our technical team would have identified them. Your technical team has been hiding the problems. Jack's voice was steady, certain. I can show you emails where they explicitly discuss concealing malfunction reports from management. The room grew very quiet. Elizabeth used the moment to take control. I've personally verified Mr. Miller's claims. I've seen the evidence, and it's compelling. If we implement this system across Horizon 2.0 in its current state, we're looking at potential disasters, lawsuits, and possibly even loss of life. Harold's expression had grown increasingly grave. Why are we only hearing about this now on the day we're set to finalize the project? Because no one wanted to be the bearer of bad news. Elizabeth's voice was firm. Our corporate culture has become one where problems are hidden rather than solved. And it's not just the AI system that we've been turning a blind eye to. She took a deep breath. We need to reconsider our entire approach to Horizon 2.0. What are you talking about? Harold's voice sharpened. The project has been approved. The financing is in place. We're displacing hundreds of families, many of whom have lived in East Heights for generations. We're destroying a community in the name of progress. Elizabeth's gaze swept the room. Mr. Miller lives in one of those buildings with his 8-year-old daughter. Today is her birthday, and instead of celebrating, he's here trying to save his home. Jack watched as the board members exchanged glances, some dismissive, others concerned. Elizabeth was putting her professional reputation on the line, and he couldn't quite believe it was happening. Elizabeth, Richard's voice was sharp with barely concealed anger. This is all very touching, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. The Horizon 2.0 project has been projected to deliver a 22% return on investment in the first year alone. And how much will it cost us when the AI system fails catastrophically? Elizabeth countered. When residents are trapped in their homes during a fire because the system decided to lock down for security reasons? When an entire commercial section floods because the system miscalculated a water pressure issue? Her voice grew more intense. Not to mention the public relations disaster when the media picks up on how we knowingly displaced working families to build luxury condos that many of them used to clean or maintain. This is all very interesting, another board member spoke up, a woman with a British accent and a skeptical expression. But we've already committed to our investors. The plans are finalized. Plans can change. Elizabeth's voice was firm. And they will. I'm exercising my executive authority to halt the project as currently designed. A murmur ran through the room. Harold leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Elizabeth, be reasonable. We can and we will, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice rising with conviction. I'm proposing a redesign that addresses both the technical flaws and the community impact. We'll incorporate more affordable housing, real affordable housing. We'll preserve existing structures where possible instead of demolishing everything. And most importantly, we'll rebuild the AI system from the ground up with safety as the primary directive, not cost saving. That will add hundreds of millions to the budget, Richard objected, his face flushed with anger, and save billions in potential lawsuits when the system fails catastrophically, Elizabeth countered. Not to mention the human cost, which none of our spreadsheets account for. She looked around the room, her voice steady and resolute. When my mother cleaned office buildings at night, she used to tell me about the executives who worked there, how they made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever meeting the people those decisions impacted. I promised myself I'd be different. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that mission. Today has been illuminating. The room fell silent again. Jack felt a surge of respect for Elizabeth that he would never have expected this morning. She was risking everything, her position, her reputation, possibly even her relationship with her father, to do the right thing. Harold finally broke the silence, his voice carefully controlled. What exactly are you proposing, Elizabeth? Elizabeth nodded to Jack, who stepped forward, seizing the moment. The AI system needs a complete redesign with human safety as the top priority. The development plan needs to incorporate the existing community rather than replacing it, and the process needs to be transparent, with real community input, not just performative town halls where decisions have already been made. Richard scoffed. And I suppose you're the man to oversee this redesign? A maintenance worker? Before Jack could respond, Elizabeth cut in. Actually, yes, Mr. Miller understands both the technical aspects and the human impact better than anyone else on our team. I'd like to bring him on as a consultant during the redesign phase. Jack tried to keep the shock from showing on his face. This wasn't part of any plan they'd discussed. Harold studied his daughter for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Jack. Mr. Miller, if what you're saying about the AI system is accurate, why bring this to Elizabeth rather than going public? You could have taken this to the media, created a PR nightmare for us. Jack met the older man's gaze steadily. Because that wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have killed the project, but it wouldn't have made the next one any better. I don't want to destroy what you're building. I just want it to be done right for everyone involved. Harold nodded slowly as if Jack had passed some unspoken test. Elizabeth, the board will need time to consider this change in direction. I propose we take a 6-month pause for reassessment and redesign, with regular progress reports to ensure we're not just kicking the can down the road. Elizabeth glanced at Jack, then back to her father. Thank you, that's all I'm asking for, a chance to do this right. The board meeting stretched for hours with heated debates and financial projections being recalculated in real time. Throughout it all, Elizabeth stood firm, with Jack providing technical insights that none of the executives could refute. By the time they emerged, Jack was exhausted, but filled with a cautious hope he hadn't felt in months. Sophie had fallen asleep on Elizabeth's office couch, her birthday completely disrupted, but potentially her home saved. Is it over? Jack asked quietly, gently waking his daughter. Elizabeth nodded, exhaustion and something like peace settling on her features. The board has agreed to a 6-month redesign period. We're going back to the drawing board with community input this time. She knelt down to Sophie's level as the girl rubbed sleep from her eyes. And no one is going to take your home away. Sophie looked at her skeptically. Promise? I promise, Elizabeth said solemnly. In fact, I'd like to hire your dad to help make sure we get it right this time. Jack looked at her in surprise. What? I need someone who understands both the technical aspects and the human impact, Elizabeth explained. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. She smiled slightly. You seem uniquely qualified. As they left the building, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. Sophie's birthday lunch had become a birthday dinner, but the child seemed unbothered by the delay, chattering excitedly about her day's unexpected adventure. So, are you Dad's boss now? She asked Elizabeth as they walked to the car. Elizabeth laughed, the sound surprisingly natural after the tension of the day. No, we'll be partners. Your dad knows things I don't, and I know things he doesn't. Together, maybe we can build something that works for everyone. Jack watched this exchange, still processing the day's dramatic turn of events. This morning, he'd been a maintenance worker dreading the loss of his home. Tonight, he was being offered a chance to reshape a $3 billion project and potentially save his community. And the person offering this opportunity was the last person he'd have expected to be on his side. As they reached Elizabeth's car, she hesitated, then turned to face him. Jack, I know this day didn't go as planned for any of us, but I'd like to make it up to Sophie. Her birthday deserves a proper celebration. Sophie's eyes lit up at the mention of her birthday. Can we still go to Milo's Pizza? They have the big arcade and the ice cream sundaes. Elizabeth glanced at Jack, seeking his approval. He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips despite his exhaustion. Milo's Pizza it is, Elizabeth declared, as if announcing a major corporate decision. As they drove through the city, Jack found himself studying Elizabeth's profile in the fading light. The corporate mask had fallen away completely, revealing a woman far more complex than he had assumed. He wondered what had really happened in that elevator. What invisible line had been crossed that allowed them to see each other as people, rather than symbols of opposing forces. Sometimes we have to get stuck to find our way forward. Elizabeth spoke quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Her eyes met his briefly in the rearview mirror before returning to the road. The comment lingered between them as they pulled into the restaurant parking lot, a new understanding beginning to form where animosity had been just hours before. And as Sophie raced ahead toward the colorful lights of the pizzeria, Jack realized that today, a day that had started with such fear and frustration, might just have changed everything for the better. Milo's Pizza buzzed with the chaos of arcade machines, children's laughter, and the smell of cheese and tomato sauce. Sophie raced from game to game, birthday crown perched proudly on her head, tickets accumulating in her small fists. Jack watched her, grateful for the momentary joy that pushed aside the day's tensions. Elizabeth sat across from him at the red vinyl booth, so out of place in her designer suit that it was almost comical. She'd removed her jacket and rolled up her sleeves, small concessions to informality that somehow made her seem more human. 3 days later, the reality of what they'd set in motion hit Jack full force. Elizabeth's call came early, just as he was making Sophie's breakfast. We need to start today. First meeting at 9. The energy in her voice crackled through the phone. The board's already having second thoughts. Jack glanced at the kitchen calendar. He wasn't scheduled for a maintenance shift until tomorrow, but Sophie's summer program didn't start until next week. I can't just drop everything on zero notice. Not with an 8-year-old. Bring her. I'll arrange something. Elizabeth's tone brooked no argument. This is too important to wait. We have enemies already organizing against us. An hour later, Jack found himself back in the Reynolds Development headquarters, Sophie in tow. She clutched her backpack of activities, wide-eyed at the towering glass building. A young assistant greeted them, introducing herself as Maya, with warm brown eyes and a reassuring smile for Sophie. I've got a great space set up for you with games, books, and movies. And there might be some art supplies too. Sophie glanced questioningly at Jack, seeking his permission. He nodded, surprised at Elizabeth's thoughtfulness in arranging childcare. Maybe the CEO had more understanding of family logistics than he'd assumed. As Maya led Sophie away, Elizabeth appeared from a nearby conference room, tablet in hand. The executive stillness had returned to her demeanor, but something was different. A new intensity in her eyes, purposeful rather than cold. Come on, you need to see what we're up against. Inside the conference room, digital displays covered the walls. Spreadsheets, architectural renderings, and emails scrolled across screens. Elizabeth tapped her tablet, and the largest screen filled with a detailed map of East Heights, Jack's neighborhood highlighted in red, slated for complete demolition. The words appeared in stark text beneath the image. This is what the board approved. Elizabeth's voice was tight with frustration. Every building in your community replaced with luxury high-rises and commercial space. The AI system integrated throughout, controlling everything from climate to security. Jack studied the designs, anger rising at the clinical way his neighborhood had been reduced to a development opportunity. Where do the current residents go? His voice echoed in the empty conference room. Elizabeth swiped to another screen. According to the original plan, nowhere, that's our concern. The relocation budget is minimal, enough for legal compliance, not actual assistance. She met his gaze directly. This is what I want to change first. For the next hour, they dug into the details of the project, the technical specifications, the financial projections, the marketing plans that described East Heights as ripe for revitalization and underutilized real estate. Jack pointed out flaws in the AI architecture, marking areas where safety had been compromised for efficiency. Elizabeth took notes, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp technical mind beneath the executive veneer. The door opened, and Richard Gray, the CTO Jack had met in the board meeting, strode in, annoyance evident in every line of his body. He stopped short at the sight of Jack. Elizabeth, when you said you were bringing in a consultant, I assumed you meant someone with credentials. His gaze flicked dismissively over Jack's casual clothes. Elizabeth didn't look up from her tablet. Jack has more practical experience with our systems than half your engineering team combined, Richard. And unlike them, he hasn't been hiding critical failures to meet deadlines. Richard's face flushed, but his voice remained controlled. The board may have granted you this exploratory period, but that doesn't mean we need to waste resources on unqualified input. His attention shifted to Jack. No offense, but maintaining equipment doesn't qualify you to redesign it. Jack stood straighter, meeting the executive's gaze. I designed the original electrical systems for 3 of your properties, including the Thompson Tower. Engineering physics from MIT, top of my class, before I stepped back to care for my family. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew his worth, regardless of his current title. Want to compare qualifications? I'm game. Elizabeth's lips twitched with the ghost of a smile as Richard reassessed Jack with narrowed eyes. Fine. Just remember that every delay costs this company millions. This pet project of Elizabeth's is on a clock. 30 days. Then we go back to the original plan when it inevitably fails. He turned and left, the door closing with a decisive click behind him. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. That's the least of our problems. I've got the board watching every move, the investors nervous about delays, and now Richard and Martin are actively working against us. Jack leaned against the conference table. Why are you doing this? Really, you could have ignored what I showed you, signed off on the original plan, and been planning your bonus by now. Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. When I was 10, our apartment building was demolished for urban renewal. She traced an invisible pattern on the table's polished surface. No notice, minimal compensation. My mother had to work double shifts for months to afford a new place. Further from her jobs, worse schools for me. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I swore I'd never be the person behind that kind of decision. Yet here I am 30 years later, doing exactly the same thing to families like yours. The admission hung between them, unexpectedly personal. Before Jack could respond, Maya appeared at the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophie's asking for her father. Something about her inhaler? Jack was instantly alert. Where is she? In the break room. She says she's fine, but... He was already moving, Elizabeth following close behind. Sophie sat at a table strewn with colored markers, her breathing slightly labored but not in crisis. She brightened when she saw Jack. Daddy, I forgot my spare inhaler, but I'm okay. Jack knelt beside her, assessing her with the practiced eye of a parent who'd managed countless asthma episodes. You sure, sunshine? No tightness? Sophie nodded, but Jack noted the slight wheeze in her breathing. He glanced up at Elizabeth. I need to get her home. Her backup medication is there. I'll drive you. Elizabeth was already gathering her things. The drive to East Heights revealed a neighborhood that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming corporate world of Reynolds development. Modest apartment buildings lined streets dotted with small businesses, community centers, and parks where children played despite the equipment being somewhat worn. Jack directed Elizabeth through familiar streets until they reached his building. A solid brick structure from the 1950s, well-maintained but showing its age. Elizabeth parked, taking in the neighborhood through new eyes. This doesn't match the descriptions in our reports. According to our assessments, this area is blighted and deteriorating. Jack unlocked the building's front door, holding it open for them. That's because your assessments were designed to support the conclusion you wanted. Hard to justify demolishing a functional community unless you convince everyone it's falling apart. The lobby was clean and bright, with a bulletin board covered in community announcements, babysitting offers, local business ads, a schedule for the senior center. An elderly man emerged from the mailroom, nodding to Jack before doing a double take at Elizabeth. "Jack, this the developer lady you've been fighting with?" His bushy eyebrows rose above thick glasses. Jack made quick introductions. "Mr. Grayson, this is Elizabeth Reynolds. Elizabeth, this is Leo Grayson. He's lived here 42 years and knows everything about everyone." Leo extended a weathered hand which Elizabeth shook without hesitation. "So you're the one who wants to knock down my home." His directness held no malice, just straightforward assessment. "I'm reconsidering that decision, actually." Elizabeth maintained eye contact with the older man. "I'd like to learn more about the neighborhood if you're willing to share." Leo studied her for a long moment. Been a lot of suits through here making promises. His skepticism was evident, but not unkind. "Jack's a good judge of character, though. If he's giving you a chance, maybe we should too." Sophie tugged at Jack's hand, reminding him of their purpose. They continued to their third-floor apartment, the elevator out of service as it had been for 2 weeks. Once inside, Jack quickly found Sophie's medication while Elizabeth took in the modest but well-kept space. The living room walls were covered with Sophie's artwork, family photos, and bookshelves overstuffed with everything from engineering texts to children's stories. A corner had been transformed into a small workshop where Jack apparently handled minor repairs for neighbors. A toaster in pieces, a lamp waiting for rewiring. Most striking was the memory wall Sophie had mentioned, a collection of photos, dried flowers, ticket stubs, and other mementos of Sophie's mother. Elizabeth moved closer to the display, drawn to a photo of a smiling woman with Sophie's blue eyes and blonde hair. Sophie appeared beside her, breathing easier after her medication. "That's my mom." Her voice carried pride mixed with wistful longing. "Dad says I have her laugh. She was beautiful." Elizabeth's voice was soft. "She taught kindergarten." Sophie pointed to various items on the wall. "That's from when we went to the zoo. And that's the movie ticket from the last film we saw together. And that's a leaf from the tree outside the hospital where she—" Jack gently interrupted, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Why don't you finish your drawing for Maya while I talk to Ms. Reynolds?" Once Sophie was settled at the kitchen table, Jack returned to find Elizabeth still studying the memory wall. "This is what you meant about memories being in the walls." Her words were quiet, understanding dawning in her expression. Jack nodded, moving to the window that overlooked the street below. From here, he could see the community garden where Sophie had planted sunflowers, the corner bodega where the owner still gave her free candy like he had her mother, and the small park where community events brought everyone together on summer evenings. "Your reports classify this as substandard housing with minimal community resources." Jack gestured to the view. "But what we see is home. The people here look out for each other. When Sophie had pneumonia last winter, Mrs. Diaz from upstairs cooked for us for 2 weeks. When Mr. Grayson's hip was replaced, 4 different neighbors organized a schedule to help him with errands and appointments." Elizabeth joined him at the window, seeing the neighborhood through his eyes. "This is what the numbers don't show. You can't quantify community on a spreadsheet." Jack turned to face her. "These connections keep people going through hard times. They're worth more than luxury amenities or smart technology." Elizabeth was silent, her gaze moving from the window to the memory wall to Sophie sketching contentedly at the table. Finally, she spoke. "Show me more." The next 3 hours transformed Elizabeth's understanding of East Heights. Jack led her through the neighborhood, introducing her to the people whose lives would be upended by the Horizon 2.0 project. At the community center, senior citizens played chess and taught local children traditional crafts. At the small repair shop on the corner, Bill Thomas, a Vietnam veteran who'd lost his leg, fixed bicycles with Sophie eagerly assisting, her earlier asthma episode forgotten. Bill's weathered face broke into a smile when he saw them approach. "Jack, just in time. Your girl here is becoming quite the mechanic." He ruffled Sophie's hair affectionately before noticing Elizabeth. His expression cooled. "You're the Reynolds woman." Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "I am. I'm here to learn about what we'd be destroying." Bill's eyebrows rose at her candor. "Well, that's a first. Usually you developer types send some community relations person with a clipboard and fake smile." He gestured to the bicycles lined up for repair. "Been fixing these for neighborhood kids for 15 years. free for families who can't afford it. What happens to them when you tear all this down? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Elizabeth's honesty seemed to surprise Bill as much as it had Jack. They continued their tour, stopping at Sarah Chen's apartment. The nurse practitioner had just returned from a night shift at the hospital, dark circles under her eyes but a warm smile for Sophie, who rushed to hug her. Sarah's eyes widened at the sight of Elizabeth, recognition immediate. She's from Reynolds? The question directed at Jack carried disbelief. She wants to understand the neighborhood. Jack's explanation sounded inadequate even to his own ears, but Sarah nodded slowly, inviting them in for tea. Inside, Sarah explained how she'd created an informal medical resource for residents without insurance or transportation to clinics. I do basic checkups, help manage chronic conditions, make sure elderly residents take their medications correctly. She gestured to a small table covered with medical supplies. It's not much, but it fills the gaps in our broken healthcare system. Elizabeth absorbed this information, asking thoughtful questions about the community's needs and Sarah's improvised solutions. Jack watched her growing comprehension of the ecosystem that existed here, invisible to corporate assessments but vital to residents' well-being. Their final stop was Carlos Mendoza's bodega, a community hub where notices were posted, information shared, and small emergencies handled. Carlos greeted Sophie like family, pressing candy into her hand before turning suspicious eyes on Elizabeth. Jack made introductions, explaining Elizabeth's presence. Carlos listened, arms crossed before speaking. My father opened this store 40 years ago. We survived riots, recessions, 3 attempted robberies. His dark eyes held Elizabeth's. Your fancy project can do what none of that could, end us completely. Elizabeth didn't flinch from his anger. What would it take for your business to survive and thrive through redevelopment? The direct question caught Carlos off guard. He glanced at Jack, who nodded encouragement. Affordable retail space, not some corporate rate that only chains can pay. And my customers need to stay in the neighborhood. Without them, it doesn't matter what you charge for rent. Elizabeth pulled out her phone, making notes. What else? By late afternoon, they'd spoken to dozens of residents and business owners. Back in Jack's apartment, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, visibly processing everything she'd seen. Sophie had gone to play with a friend down the hall, leaving them alone with the weight of the day's revelations. Those people at the board meeting, Jack's voice broke the silence. Did they see any of this before approving demolition? Elizabeth shook her head, guilt evident in her expression. They saw photos in a presentation, statistics on property values, crime reports from 5 years ago before community policing improved things. Nothing about actual human beings. Jack opened a folder on the table, the collection of community resistance he'd been building for months. Petitions, alternative development proposals, legal research on residents' rights. Everything we tried to show your company. Everything that was ignored. Elizabeth paged through the documents, stopping at a community-created alternative plan. It was amateur compared to professional designs, but showed careful thought about preserving existing structures while allowing for new development. This is actually not bad. The concepts are sound. Jack leaned forward. That's what we've been saying. We're not against improvement. We're against erasure. His finger traced the outline of a mixed-use area on the plan. We could incorporate affordable housing, local businesses, green space, all while updating infrastructure and adding new elements. Elizabeth studied the drawings with new eyes. If we combine this community vision with our resources and technical expertise, she looked up suddenly. This could work, not just as a compromise, but as something better than the original plan, something unique. Jack felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by reality. Your board will never go for it, not with the profit margins they're expecting. Let me worry about the board. Elizabeth's expression hardened with determination. You focus on the technical redesign of the AI system. I need something concrete to show them. Proof that we can create a system that prioritizes safety without sacrificing efficiency. The next morning found them back at Reynolds Development, this time with a growing team assembled in a conference room Elizabeth had commandeered. Engineers, architects, and community development specialists gathered around tables covered with plans and laptops. Jack had left Sophie with Bill and Sarah, who had eagerly volunteered to watch her for the day. Elizabeth stood at the head of the table, commanding the room's attention. We have 30 days to create a new vision for Horizon 2.0, one that preserves what's valuable about East Heights while bringing in the improvements the area needs. She gestured to Jack. Mr. Miller will be leading the technical redesign of the AI system, focusing on human safety as the primary directive. Richard leaned against the wall, arms crossed skeptically. And how exactly does a maintenance worker lead a technical redesign? His challenge was direct, designed to undermine Jack's authority before it could be established. Jack met the CTO's gaze steadily. The same way I designed the systems for 3 of your most profitable properties before my wife got sick. He turned to the engineering team. The current AI prioritizes cost efficiency over human safety. It makes decisions based on resource allocation rather than risk assessment. We need to invert that hierarchy completely. One of the younger engineers raised her hand tentatively, but the efficiency algorithms are what made the system marketable in the first place. If we prioritize safety at every decision point, won't that increase operational costs significantly? Elizabeth stepped in. Better to increase operational costs than face lawsuits when the system fails and people get hurt. Or worse. Her tone left no room for debate. The protection of human life is non-negotiable. The meeting continued, with Jack outlining his vision for the system redesign. He drew on whiteboards, pulled up code snippets, and systematically dismantled the existing architecture to show where failures originated. The engineers watched with growing respect as his expertise became undeniable, regardless of his current job title. As the day progressed, Elizabeth moved between groups, connecting ideas, resolving conflicts, and keeping everyone focused on the tight deadline. Jack caught glimpses of a leadership style he hadn't expected, collaborative rather than dictatorial, questioning rather than declaring. By late afternoon, the room had transformed from skeptical professionals to an energized team. Jack found himself surrounded by engineers eager to work on the safety protocols he'd proposed, their initial doubt replaced by engagement. As they dispersed to begin their assigned tasks, Elizabeth approached, satisfaction evident in her expression. You've won them over. The engineers, at least. Her voice was pitched for his ears only. Technical problems have objective solutions. Jack gathered his notes. People are easier to convince than boardrooms. Elizabeth's smile faded. Speaking of boardrooms, Martin's called an emergency investor meeting for tomorrow. No warning, no agenda provided. She ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of unguarded stress. He's making his move already. Jack frowned. Can he do that? Go around you? The CEO title has limits when major shareholders get nervous. Her voice carried the weight of corporate politics Jack had never had to navigate. I need concrete progress to show them. Something that proves this new direction isn't just idealism. I'll have initial safety protocols drafted by morning. Jack glanced at his watch. But I need to get home to Sophie now. Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. Go, I'll keep working here. And Jack, thank you for today, for making them see what I couldn't explain. The warmth in her voice followed him out of the building, unexpected and unsettling in its sincerity. The next week unfolded in a blur of activity. Jack split his time between the corporate headquarters, where he led the technical redesign, and community meetings in East Heights, where residents provided input on the new development vision. Sophie divided her days between summer activities and time at the office, where Maya had created a small workspace for her. The little girl had become a fixture at Reynolds Development, charming even the most stern executives with her directness and curiosity. Elizabeth faced her own battles in boardrooms and investor calls, defending the new direction against increasingly organized opposition. Richard and Martin had mobilized significant shareholder concern, presenting the redesign as a financial disaster in the making. Her father remained neutral, watching from the sidelines as she fought for her vision. 10 days into the project, disaster struck. Jack was deep in code review with the engineering team when Elizabeth burst into the room, her usual composure shattered. Everyone out, now. I need to speak with Jack alone. Her voice brooked no argument, and the room emptied quickly, engineers exchanging nervous glances. What's happened? Jack set aside his laptop, alarmed by her expression. Elizabeth slammed a tablet onto the table, bringing up a financial report. They've released projections showing the redesign will reduce profits by 40%. The board is in an uproar and three major investors are threatening to pull out. Are the numbers accurate? Jack studied the spreadsheet, looking for the manipulation he suspected must be there. Elizabeth paced the length of the room. They're exaggerated, but based enough in reality that I can't simply dismiss them. The truth is, our plan will reduce the profit margins. We're prioritizing people over maximum returns. Her frustration was palpable. I knew this was coming, but not so soon and not so effectively. Jack scrolled through the report, identifying the assumptions that had been manipulated to paint the worst possible picture. We can counter this, show the long-term benefits, the reduced liability costs, the positive PR value. Elizabeth stopped pacing, fixing him with an intense gaze. They've given me an ultimatum. Either I recommit to the original plan by the end of the week, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence. She sank into a chair, the weight of corporate warfare evident in the lines of her face. I could lose everything, Jack. My position, the company my father built, my ability to change anything. The vulnerability in her voice struck Jack deeply. For the first time, he saw beyond the CEO to the woman fighting for principles against overwhelming opposition. And what will you do? Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, conflict clear in her expression. Finally, she straightened, resolution replacing doubt. I'll fight, but I need to know you're with me all the way, even when it gets uglier than this, because it will. Jack considered her words carefully. His instinct was to protect his family and community first, to be wary of corporate promises that could evaporate when convenient. But over the past week, he'd seen Elizabeth wage war against her own interests for the sake of doing what was right. Her commitment had proven genuine, even costly. I'm with you. The words came easier than he'd expected. On one condition, no matter what happens with the board or investors, you protect the residents of East Heights. Even if everything else fails, you have my word. Elizabeth's voice carried the weight of a vow, her gaze steady on his. They can take my job, but they can't make me betray my promise to you and your community. The unspoken connection between them deepened in that moment, a partnership forged in shared purpose rather than shared background. Jack felt something shift, a trust forming that he'd never expected to feel for the woman who had once epitomized everything he fought against. That evening, as Jack helped Sophie with her homework, his phone buzzed with messages from community members. An emergency meeting had been called at the community center. Reynolds representatives were there, but not Elizabeth. Jack arrived to find the center packed with residents, tension thick in the air. At the front, Richard Gray and Martin West stood with presentation materials showing the original Horizon 2.0 plans, not the redesign. The message was clear. Elizabeth's vision was being systematically undermined. What is this? Jack pushed through the crowd, anger rising at the deliberate sabotage. Richard turned, false concern painted across his features. Jack, good of you to join us. We're just updating the community on the project status. Recent financial realities have necessitated a return to the original development plan. Unfortunately, Elizabeth's experimental redesign proved financially unsustainable. The lie hung in the air, brazen in its delivery. Jack scanned the room, seeing the mixture of anger, resignation, and betrayal on his neighbors' faces. They'd begun to hope, to believe in the possibility of change, and now that hope was being crushed. That's not true. Jack's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. The redesign is proceeding exactly as planned. These gentlemen don't speak for Elizabeth Reynolds or the project. Martin stepped forward, his corporate smile unwavering. I'm afraid we do, Jack. As of this afternoon, the board has temporarily relieved Elizabeth of project oversight, pending a full review of her recent emotional decisions. His emphasis on the word emotional carried unmistakable condescension. We're here as a courtesy to inform residents of the return to the approved plan. The community erupted in angry voices. Sarah Chen pushed to the front, confronting the executives directly. So all that talk about respecting our community was just for show? Just to quiet us down while you moved ahead anyway? Carlos joined her, his usually jovial face hard with anger. You come into our neighborhood, pretend to listen, then stab us in the back? This is why nobody trusts corporate promises. Richard maintained a practiced expression of regret. We understand your disappointment, But business realities must take precedence. Generous relocation packages will be provided, of course. Jack watched the scene unfold, fury building at the calculated dismantling of everything they'd worked toward. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from Elizabeth. Don't believe anything they say. I'm fighting this. Meeting with major investor now. Hold the line. The executive's words faded from his awareness as Jack made a decision. He moved to the front of the room, turning to face his neighbors rather than the Reynolds representatives. They're lying to you. The redesign is still happening. Elizabeth is still in charge of the project. She's meeting with investors right now to secure the funding we need. Richard stepped forward, voice hardening. That's enough, Miller. You're speaking on matters you don't understand. Elizabeth's authority has been suspended. Jack ignored him, focusing on the community he'd lived in for years. These men are staging a corporate coup because they're threatened by a vision that puts people before profit margins. They know our redesign will work, and they're terrified of what that means for business as usual. The residents fell silent, watching the confrontation with wary hope. Bill Thomas wheeled himself forward, addressing the crowd. I've known Jack Miller for years. If he says Elizabeth Reynolds is fighting for us, I believe him. He turned challenging eyes to Richard and Martin. And I think we should show these gentlemen exactly what community solidarity looks like. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Carlos called out from the back. Anyone want to hear what these suits said about our neighborhood in their internal reports? I've got copies right here. He waved printouts Jack recognized from the files Elizabeth had shared. Martin's corporate mask slipped for an instant, revealing alarm. Those are confidential company documents, which describe our homes as blighted properties ripe for acquisition and our businesses as negligible obstacles to development. Carlos read from the paper, voice rising with indignation. It says right here that resident resistance is expected to be disorganized and ineffective due to limited resources and education. The room exploded in outrage. Richard and Martin found themselves surrounded by angry residents demanding answers, their corporate composure crumbling in the face of raw community emotion. Jack watched as the calculated takeover dissolved into chaos, the executives retreating under the pressure of united neighborhood resistance. As the community meeting transformed into a strategy session, Jack slipped outside to call Elizabeth. The night air was cool against his face as he waited for her to answer. Jack. Her voice was tight with tension. How bad is it? Your colleagues tried to hijack the community meeting. Tell everyone you'd been removed from the project. He leaned against the community center wall, adrenaline still pumping from the confrontation. We shut them down. For now. What's happening on your end? I'm with James Chen. Elizabeth named one of the company's largest investors, a tech billionaire known for his interest in sustainable development. He's intrigued by our redesign, especially the AI safety protocols. If I can get him on board, the other investors will follow. Her voice lowered. But my father just called. The board is meeting tomorrow morning to vote on my continued leadership. Richard and Martin have been lobbying members all day. Jack closed his eyes, the weight of corporate warfare settling on his shoulders. What do you need from me? Proof that the redesign works. Hard evidence that we can build a safer system without sacrificing too much efficiency. Something I can show them tomorrow morning. The desperation in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Jack checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. I'll work through the night. Have something for you by dawn. He hesitated, then added, Don't give up, Elizabeth. What we're doing matters. The line was silent for a moment before she responded, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Thank you, Jack, for believing in this, for believing in me when you have every reason not to. The connection ended, leaving Jack alone with the weight of what lay ahead. Inside the community center, his neighbors were organizing, preparing letters, planning protests, readying for battle against corporate giants. Outside, the quiet streets of East Heights carried on, unaware that their fate would be decided in a boardroom battle the next morning. Jack made his way home, where Sophie was already asleep under Sarah's watchful care. After thanking his neighbor, he sat up at the kitchen table, laptop open, determination fueling him despite the exhaustion of the day. Lines of code filled his screen as he worked to save not just his home, but the woman who had unexpectedly become his ally in an impossible fight. Hours blurred together as Jack programmed, tested, refined, and documented. By 4:30 a.m., he had what Elizabeth needed, a working prototype of the Safety First AI system, complete with simulations showing its effectiveness in crisis scenarios. The efficiency loss was real but manageable, 22% rather than the 40% Richard and Martin had claimed. More importantly, the system's safety protocols were undeniable, creating a compelling case for the redesign that even profit-focused investors would struggle to dismiss. As dawn broke over East Heights, Jack emailed the files to Elizabeth, adding a simple message. "This works. Now go make them listen." He fell into bed fully clothed, exhaustion claiming him instantly. His last conscious thought was of Elizabeth, facing a boardroom of hostile executives with nothing but conviction and his code as weapons. Against all odds, he found himself praying she would win. The sound of his phone jolted Jack awake just after noon. Sophie was at Bill's for the day, giving him the rare luxury of uninterrupted sleep that he'd clearly needed. The caller ID showed Elizabeth's name, and he answered with sleep-rough voice. "Did it work?" Elizabeth's laugh, genuine and unguarded, was answer enough. "It worked. James Chen went through your prototype line by line, then announced he was increasing his investment. Said any company smart enough to prioritize safety this way was worth backing." Jack sat up, rubbing his face as the news registered. "And the board?" "Split down the middle until my father finally broke his silence." Elizabeth's voice carried wonderment. He stood up, told Richard and Martin they were short-sighted fools, and endorsed the redesign fully. Said it was the future of responsible development. Relief washed through Jack, so powerful it left him momentarily speechless. Finally, he managed, "So we won? Just like that?" "We won the battle," Elizabeth's voice sobered. "The war's still ahead. Richard and Martin have been sidelined, but not removed. They've still got allies on the board and among investors. We have 60 days now instead of 30, but the pressure's still on to deliver." Jack swung his legs over the side of the bed, mind already shifting to the work ahead. "We'll make it work. The community's fully engaged now, and your engineering team is on board with the new direction. If we can keep this momentum—" A knock at his apartment door interrupted his thoughts. Jack frowned, not expecting anyone. "Hold on, someone's here." He moved through the apartment, phone still to his ear, and opened the door to find Elizabeth standing there, cell phone in hand, exhaustion and triumph mingled in her smile. "I thought we should celebrate in person." She ended the call, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Mind if I come in?" Jack stepped aside, allowing Elizabeth into the apartment. Her usual corporate perfection had given way to something more human. Suit jacket draped over her arm, hair slightly disheveled. The triumphant exhaustion of someone who'd fought a major battle and somehow emerged victorious. She carried a paper bag that emitted the tempting aroma of fresh pastries. "Thought you might not have eaten yet." She placed the bag on the kitchen counter. "I certainly haven't had time." Jack rummaged for plates, acutely aware of his rumpled appearance after his coding marathon. The strange domesticity of the moment struck him. Elizabeth Reynolds, CEO of a development company worth billions, standing in his modest kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 6 weeks ago, they'd been opponents in a community battle. Now they were allies celebrating a shared victory. They settled at the kitchen table with coffee and pastries, the morning sun streaming through windows that framed the neighborhood Elizabeth had nearly destroyed and was now committed to preserving. The silence between them was comfortable, both too tired for unnecessary words. So what happens now? Jack finally broke the quiet, bringing them back to the reality beyond this moment. Elizabeth brushed a crumb from her fingers, her expression turning thoughtful. "Now comes the hard part. We actually have to deliver on everything we've promised. The AI system redesign, the community integration plan, the mixed income housing model, all of it." Jack nodded, the weight of the task ahead settling on his shoulders. 60 days isn't much time to reinvent a $3 billion project. But we're not starting from scratch. Elizabeth's energy seemed to return as she spoke. "We've got your prototype, the community's input, and James Chen's backing. That's a solid foundation." Their planning sessions had stretched into the afternoon, the kitchen table becoming command central for a development revolution. They mapped out timelines, assigned responsibilities, and debated approaches to the inevitable obstacles ahead. When Sophie returned from Bill's workshop, proudly carrying a wooden toolbox she'd helped build, She found them surrounded by papers and laptops, deep in discussion about housing density models. The next morning marked the official launch of the redesigned Horizon 2.0 project. Jack arrived at Reynolds Development headquarters to find the conference room transformed into a war room. Wall-sized screens displayed project timelines, architectural renderings, and code repositories. Engineers, architects, and community representatives moved between workstations, a buzz of focused energy filling the space. Elizabeth stood at the center of the activity, directing teams with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Her corporate armor had returned, impeccable suit, perfect hair, commanding presence. But something had changed. There was a new authenticity to her leadership, a connection to the people around her that hadn't existed before. The community liaison team needs access to the housing survey data. Her instructions cut through the noise as she spotted Jack. And make sure Jack's engineering group has priority server access. The AI safety protocols are our critical path. Jack integrated himself into the organized chaos, taking charge of the technical team responsible for the AI redesign. His years in the corporate world came rushing back, the muscle memory of leadership returning as he guided the younger engineers through the complex architecture of the new safety-first system. By mid-afternoon, the inevitable complications began to surface. Jack found himself staring at simulation results that made no sense, the system's performance degrading despite code improvements. He rubbed his eyes, frustration mounting as the hours of debugging yielded no solutions. Elizabeth appeared at his side, sensing the roadblock. "What are we looking at?" Jack gestured to the screens displaying failure data. "The safety protocols work perfectly in isolation, but when we integrate them with the building management systems, we're seeing efficiency drops of nearly 40%. Richard was right about the performance hit. His admission came reluctantly, the technical reality contradicting their promises to the board. Elizabeth studied the data, her brow furrowing. "We can't go back to the board with this. They'll shut us down immediately." The engineers around them fell silent, the specter of failure casting a shadow over their earlier enthusiasm. Jack felt the weight of their expectations, knowing that the entire project and the fate of his community rested on solving this seemingly insurmountable technical challenge. "I need time." His voice betrayed his uncertainty. Maybe a different approach to the integration layer. Elizabeth's phone chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her expression darkening. "Richard's called another investor meeting for tomorrow morning. He's going to show them these exact performance metrics, I guarantee it. How would he even have access to this data?" Jack looked around at his team, suspicion forming. A young engineer shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "The code repository is company property. Anyone with executive credentials can view the commits and test results." The realization hit Jack like a physical blow. They'd been naive to think Richard and Martin wouldn't be monitoring every aspect of the project, waiting for exactly this kind of setback to exploit. The timeline had just collapsed from 60 days to less than 24 hours. Elizabeth pulled Jack aside, her voice low and urgent. "Fix this, whatever it takes. I'll try to delay the investor meeting, but you need to make this work by morning." The pressure of the moment crystallized Jack's thinking. He dismissed the engineering team, waiting until the room cleared before turning back to the problem with fresh determination. The conventional approach wasn't working. Time to abandon convention. Through the evening and into the night, Jack deconstructed the entire system architecture, questioning fundamental assumptions about how building AI should operate. By 2 a.m., he'd identified the core issue. They were trying to overlay safety protocols on an efficiency-focused foundation. The systems were philosophically incompatible. The solution appeared with the clarity that often comes in exhaustion's wake. Instead of modifying the existing AI architecture, they needed to rebuild from the ground up with safety as the foundational principle, then optimize for efficiency within those constraints. Jack began coding furiously, the hours melting away as a new system took shape on his screen. Dawn found him still at his workstation, unshaven and bleary-eyed, but triumphant. The simulations showed a completely redesigned system that achieved 98% of the original efficiency while maintaining all safety priorities. The compromise was in complexity rather than performance. The new system required more processing power, but delivered on all their promises. Elizabeth arrived at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, tension evident in every line of her body. She stopped short at the sight of Jack's triumphant grin. "Tell me that look means what I think it means." Jack gestured to the simulation results on screen. "It works, not by fixing the old approach, but by starting fresh with the right priorities from the beginning." Relief washed over Elizabeth's features as she absorbed the data. She placed the coffee on his desk, her hand lingering near his for a moment. "Thank you for not giving up when it seemed impossible." The investor meeting that morning transformed from Richard's planned coup into Elizabeth's triumphant presentation of breakthrough innovation. Jack watched from the back of the room as she showcased the new architecture, emphasizing not just its safety features, but the elegant efficiency they'd achieved through fresh thinking. James Chen's enthusiastic endorsement sealed the victory, his technical background allowing him to appreciate the elegance of Jack's solution. Richard and Martin sat stony-faced as their opportunity to derail the project evaporated. When James Chen announced an additional investment specifically for the AI safety technology with potential applications beyond Horizon 2.0, their defeat was complete, at least for now. The following weeks saw rapid progress as Jack's technical breakthrough energized the entire project. The community integration plans moved forward, with residents of East Heights providing input on everything from building designs to public spaces. Sophie became an unofficial mascot for the project, her presence in the Reynolds development offices a constant reminder of the human lives affected by their decisions. 6 weeks into the redesign, Jack found himself standing with Elizabeth at the construction site where the first phase of Horizon 2.0 would begin. Not with demolition as originally planned, but with infrastructure upgrades to the existing neighborhood, improved electrical systems, fiber optic internet, and modernized plumbing that would benefit current residents whether they chose to remain or relocate. Elizabeth surveyed the site, satisfaction evident in her expression. "This approach costs more up front, but saves us the legal battles and PR disasters that would have come with forced relocations." She turned to Jack, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Why didn't we see this option before?" "Because you were looking at the community as an obstacle, not a partner." Jack watched as community members interacted with the construction managers, sharing knowledge about the neighborhood's quirks and needs. When you change that perspective, everything shifts. Their moment of shared satisfaction was interrupted by Maya, Elizabeth's assistant, rushing toward them with tablet in hand. "Elizabeth, you need to see this." Her usually calm demeanor was shaken. The tablet displayed financial projections that made no sense. Sudden cost increases, timeline extensions, and resource shortages that threatened to derail the entire project. Elizabeth scanned the data, confusion turning to anger. "These numbers are manipulated. Who authorized these changes to the projection models?" Maya's distress was evident. "That's just it. The system shows the changes came from your account. Your credentials, your authorization codes." "I confirmed it." Elizabeth's face paled. "That's impossible. I didn't." Jack took the tablet, examining the technical details more closely. "The timestamp shows these changes were made yesterday at 2 p.m. Where were you then?" "In the board meeting with my father and the executive committee." Elizabeth's realization was immediate. "My computer was in my office, unattended." The implications hung in the air between them. Someone with access to Elizabeth's office had used her credentials to sabotage the project from within, creating financial projections that would alarm investors and potentially trigger funding freezes. The list of people with that level of access and technical knowledge was short. "Martin." Elizabeth's voice hardened with certainty. "He's been pushing for access to the financial models for weeks, claiming he needed to review assumptions." Jack was already moving toward the car, determination in every step. "We need to prove it was him. Digital forensics, security footage, anything that places him near your office during that meeting." The drive back to headquarters was tense, both acutely aware that this attack struck at the heart of the project's viability. Financial projections weren't just numbers, they were the foundation of investor confidence. If these manipulated figures reached the board or major stakeholders before they could correct them, the damage might be irreversible. Elizabeth worked her phone during the drive, issuing instructions that would lock down the financial systems and restrict the falsified projections from spreading. By the time they reached the Reynolds building, a team of IT security specialists was waiting, along with Harold Reynolds himself. "Elizabeth, What the hell is going on? Harold's commanding presence filled the executive suite as they entered. I've got the CFO telling me our flagship project is suddenly 30% over budget and behind schedule. Elizabeth stood her ground, matching her father's intensity. Someone used my credentials to falsify the financial projections while I was in the board meeting yesterday. We're tracking down proof now, but I'm certain it was Martin. Harold's skepticism was evident. That's a serious accusation against your CFO. You'd better be certain before making it official. I am. Elizabeth's confidence never wavered. And once we prove it, I want him removed. Immediately and permanently. The next hours unfolded in a blur of technical investigation. Jack worked with the IT security team, tracing login records, examining server logs, and reconstructing the digital trail of the sabotage. By evening, they had what they needed: security footage showing Martin entering Elizabeth's office during the board meeting, timestamps matching his presence to the falsified data entries, and digital forensics tying the changes to a unique keyboard pattern identified as his. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Harold Reynolds called an emergency executive session where Martin faced the assembled evidence without the corporate mask that had served him so well. His composure cracked under Harold's withering examination, his justifications ringing hollow against the weight of proof. I was protecting this company from a reckless change in direction. Martin's desperate defense echoed in the boardroom. The original Horizon plan represented years of careful planning and maximum return on investment. This community-focused redesign is corporate suicide driven by Elizabeth's sudden attack of conscience. Harold studied his CFO with the calculated assessment of a man who had built a corporate empire and falsifying financial projections using my daughter's credentials. That was protecting the company. The board voted unanimously for Martin's immediate termination, with potential criminal charges to follow. As security escorted him from the building, his parting shot was aimed directly at Elizabeth. You can't change who we are. This company was built on putting profit first. Your father knows it, the board knows it, and deep down, so do you. The accusations lingered in the air after Martin's departure. Jack watched Elizabeth absorb the blow, noting the flicker of doubt that crossed her features before she reasserted control. The victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the knowledge that their opponents would stop at nothing to derail their vision. The corrected financial projections restored investor confidence, but Martin's sabotage attempt had exposed vulnerabilities in their process. Elizabeth implemented new security protocols and reassigned the financial modeling to a team she personally vetted. The incident also strengthened her resolve, the attack confirming they were on the right path if it threatened the old guard so profoundly. As summer turned to fall, the Horizon 2.0 project gained momentum. The first phase of infrastructure improvements neared completion, with community response overwhelmingly positive. Jack's AI system passed every safety test while maintaining efficiency targets, attracting attention from technology publications and industry experts. What had begun as a desperate compromise was evolving into a model for responsible urban development. Sophie started third grade, proudly telling her classmates that her dad was fixing buildings so people can keep their homes. Her asthma improved with the changing season, and Jack found himself cautiously optimistic about their future, both personal and communal. Elizabeth became a regular visitor to East Heights, often joining Jack and Sophie for dinner or community events. The corporate armor she wore at Reynolds Development Headquarters softened in the neighborhood, replaced by casual clothes and a genuine smile that residents initially distrusted but gradually accepted. She knew shopkeepers by name, remembered children's birthdays, and listened more than she spoke at community meetings. On a crisp October evening, they sat on a bench in the small park at the center of East Heights, watching Sophie play with neighborhood children on equipment that had been renovated as part of the first improvement phase. The setting sun painted the buildings in gold, the familiar skyline now punctuated by construction cranes that signaled progress rather than destruction. 3 months ago, I was ready to tear all this down. Elizabeth's voice was soft with wonder at her own transformation. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Jack watched Sophie's carefree play, contentment settling in his chest. Sometimes we're too close to our own assumptions to question them. It takes getting stuck in an elevator with someone who sees things differently. Elizabeth laughed, the sound unguarded and genuine. That elevator changed everything. for both of us. Their comfortable silence was interrupted by Elizabeth's phone. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to something more complex. Jack recognized the change immediately, the return of corporate reality intruding on their momentary peace. What is it? His question came with the familiarity they developed over months of collaboration. Elizabeth hesitated before responding. The International Division wants to implement our AI safety system and community integration model for developments in Europe and Asia. They're asking me to head the expansion personally, 3 years minimum, based in London. The implication hung in the air between them. 3 years abroad, an ocean away from East Heights, from the community they'd fought to preserve, from the partnership that had come to define both their professional and personal lives. Jack felt a surprising hollowness open in his chest at the thought of Elizabeth leaving. When would you go? January. After the first phase completion ceremony, her eyes remained on Sophie playing in the distance. It's a huge opportunity to scale what we've created here, to change how Reynolds operates globally, not just in one neighborhood. The logical part of Jack's mind understood the significance of the opportunity, the chance to transform an entire corporate approach to development and across continents. The emotional part registered only the impending absence of someone who had become unexpectedly essential to his life. You should take it. His voice betrayed none of the conflict he felt. This was always bigger than East Heights. You can make it the new standard everywhere. Elizabeth turned to face him directly. I'd need my human impact director with me, if he's interested. The unexpected offer caught Jack completely off guard. The international role would be a complete career resurrection, utilizing his engineering expertise on a global scale. But it would also mean uprooting Sophie, leaving the only home she'd known since her mother's death, the community that had supported them through their darkest days. I don't know, Jack watched his daughter, considering the implications. Sophie has school, friends. Her memories of her mother are here. Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, it was just a thought. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the international job description Elizabeth had sent. The role was tailor-made for his skills, overseeing the human impact of global developments, ensuring AI systems prioritize safety, and integrating community needs into corporate planning. The compensation was more than generous, the professional opportunity unparalleled. But none of that addressed the fundamental question: what was best for Sophie? For their life together, the apartment around him held more than furniture and possessions. It contained the last physical connection to his wife, the walls where Sophie's height was marked each birthday, the rooms where they had rebuilt their life after devastating loss. Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He opened it to find Bill Thomas in his wheelchair, a knowing look on his weathered face. Figured you'd still be up wrestling with that job offer. Bill rolled himself into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, the privilege of a family friend who had long since earned the right to directness. Sophie told Sarah, who told Carlos, who told me. News travels in this neighborhood. Jack managed a tired smile. Nothing stays private around here. He settled back at the table, Bill positioning his wheelchair across from him. So now you're here to tell me what to do? Bill scoffed, the sound rough from decades of cigarettes before he'd quit. Hell no, I'm here to tell you you're asking yourself the wrong question. Jack raised an eyebrow, waiting for elaboration. You're stuck on the idea that Sophie's memories of her mother only exist in these walls. Bill gestured around the apartment, but that little girl carries her mother in her heart, her laugh, her eyes. Those walls don't contain the memories, Jack. You and Sophie do. The simple truth of the observation hit Jack with unexpected force. He'd been clinging to the physical space as if it were the memories themselves, afraid that moving would somehow erase what little Sophie had left of her mother. Bill wasn't finished. This neighborhood loves you both and will miss you like hell if you go. But a man with your skills helping build better communities around the world? That's a legacy your wife would have been damn proud of. And that CEO lady, she sees something in you worth taking across an ocean. That doesn't happen every day. Jack absorbed his friend's wisdom, the perspective shifting something fundamental in his thinking. Have you always been this insightful, or is it a recent development? Bill laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen. I've been telling you young folks what's what for decades. You just started listening. After Bill left, Jack sat with his thoughts, the decision crystallizing with newfound clarity. The home they needed to preserve wasn't the physical apartment, but the family they had built within it. Sophie's memories of her mother would travel with them, enriched rather than diminished by new experiences and horizons. The next morning, Jack arrived at Reynolds Development earlier than usual, finding Elizabeth already in her office reviewing international property assessments. She looked up as he entered, something hopeful flickering in her expression before professional composure reasserted itself. "I've been thinking about your offer." Jack settled into the chair across from her desk, the formality of the setting at odds with the personal nature of their conversation. Elizabeth set aside her tablet, giving him her full attention. "And?" Jack chose his words carefully, aware of the significance of the moment for both their professional and personal futures. "I think there's a middle ground. I could consult on the international projects, travel when needed, but keep our home base here." Elizabeth studied him, disappointment briefly visible before understanding took its place. "She needs stability, a father who's present." Jack nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. "But she also needs a father who's fulfilled by his work, who's making a difference in the world." The words came from a place of new certainty. "I think we can find a balance that works for everyone." The tension in Elizabeth's shoulders eased slightly. "We'll make it work. The project needs your perspective too much to lose it." The conversation shifted to practical considerations: travel schedules, remote work capabilities, school calendars. But beneath the logistics ran a current of something deeper, a shared recognition that their professional partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated when they'd first met in that stalled elevator. December brought the completion of Horizon 2.0's first phase, marked by a community celebration that transformed East Heights into a festival of achievement. The improved infrastructure, renovated public spaces, and new community center stood as physical proof that development could enhance rather than erase existing neighborhoods. Residents who had initially viewed Reynolds Development with suspicion now proudly led tours of the improvements, highlighting the collaborative process that had incorporated their input at every stage. The official ceremony took place in the newly renovated community center. Its capacity doubled and facilities modernized while preserving the historical facade that had been a neighborhood landmark for generations. Jack stood toward the back of the crowded room, watching as Elizabeth addressed the gathered residents, officials, and media. Gone was the corporate automaton he'd first encountered. In her place stood a leader whose authenticity resonated with everyone present. "What we've accomplished here represents more than improved buildings or updated systems." Elizabeth's voice carried through the room without artificial projection, the genuine conviction behind her words providing all the amplification needed. "We've demonstrated that progress doesn't require erasure of what came before, that corporate interests and community needs aren't inherently opposed. That listening, truly listening, changes everything." Her gaze found Jack in the crowd, a moment of personal connection amid the public event. "I learned that lesson in an elevator, of all places. Sometimes getting stuck is the best way to find a new direction." The applause that followed wasn't merely polite. It was the sound of a community acknowledging one of their own, despite her arriving from the corporate world they had once feared. As the formal ceremony transitioned to celebration, with food from local restaurants and music from neighborhood artists, Jack made his way through the crowd to where Sophie was proudly showing Elizabeth her contribution to the community center mural. "Looks like you've got a future artist on your hands." Elizabeth knelt to Sophie's level, examining the painted section with genuine interest. Sophie beamed at the recognition. "I painted our building, and Dad, and you." She pointed to figures in the mural, stylized but recognizable representations of the neighborhood and its people. "Me?" Elizabeth sounded surprised to be included in the community portrait. Sophie nodded with the matter-of-fact certainty of childhood. "You're part of our family now. That's what Dad said." Jack felt heat rise to his face at his daughter's unfiltered revelation. Elizabeth looked up at him, something vulnerable and questioning in her expression, the corporate armor completely absent in this unguarded moment. Before Jack could respond, they were interrupted by Harold Reynolds, making his way through the crowd with the commanding presence that had built a corporate empire. "Elizabeth, the press is asking for statements about the international expansion." He stopped, noticing Sophie for the first time. The corporate patriarch seemed momentarily at a loss, unaccustomed to addressing children. So you must be the young lady I've heard so much about, the one who keeps my daughter and Mr. Miller on their toes. Sophie studied the older man with open curiosity. You're Elizabeth's dad. You look like her when she's being serious. A surprised laugh escaped Harold, genuine amusement breaking through the corporate facade. Perceptive child. Yes, I suppose we do share that particular expression. He glanced between Jack and Elizabeth, something calculating in his assessment. The international press can wait a few minutes. I believe I was promised some of Carlos's famous empanadas at this event. As Harold moved toward the food tables, Elizabeth turned back to Jack, the interrupted moment still hanging between them. What Sophie said, Jack's response came with newfound certainty. She's right. You are part of our family now. However that looks going forward. The simple acknowledgement shifted something between them, an unspoken barrier falling away, possibilities opening that neither had allowed themselves to fully consider until this moment. Elizabeth's hand found Jack's, the contact brief but deliberate, a promise of conversations to come. The new year arrived with fresh momentum. The international expansion moved forward, with Jack serving as remote consultant, traveling to London monthly while maintaining his primary role in East Heights. Sophie thrived in the arrangement, proud of her father's important work and excited by the souvenirs and stories from his trips abroad. Elizabeth split her time between headquarters and the international offices, their professional partnership deepening despite the geographic challenges. On Sophie's 9th birthday, Jack kept his promise of lunch at Milo's Pizza, but this time they had a guest. Elizabeth joined them, bringing a gift wrapped in paper Sophie had admired weeks earlier, a complex engineering set designed for young builders. Happy birthday, Sophie. Elizabeth slid the package across the table. Your dad tells me you're interested in building things, like he is. Sophie tore open the gift with characteristic enthusiasm. This is awesome, Dad, look! She immediately began examining the components, engineering curiosity evident in her focused attention. What do you say, Sophie? Jack prompted gently. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sophie jumped up to give her a hug, which Elizabeth returned with genuine warmth. Over ice cream sundaes, Elizabeth leaned toward Jack, her voice pitched for his ears only. The international expansion is moving forward faster than expected. The board wants me based in London, full-time by summer. Jack felt the familiar conflict between professional opportunity and personal stability. I can increase my consulting trips, but Sophie's school year, Elizabeth cut him off gently. Actually, I've been thinking about a different approach. Her eyes held his, something vulnerable in her normally confident gaze. What if I ran the international division from here? Video conferences, quarterly trips to the European offices, but based primarily in East Heights. Jack set down his spoon, surprised by the suggestion. You'd do that? Give up the London headquarters, the prestige of running it from there? Elizabeth glanced at Sophie, happily absorbed in her dessert, then back to Jack. Some things matter more than corporate convention. This community, the work we're doing here. She hesitated, then added softly, you and Sophie. The simple acknowledgement of priorities realigned sent warmth spreading through Jack's chest. The woman sitting across from him had transformed from the corporate executive who once saw his neighborhood as merely a development opportunity. She had become someone who understood the value of community, of family, of putting people before profit margins, someone he had come to care for deeply. Later, as they walked through the park near the restaurant, Sophie ran ahead to the playground while Jack and Elizabeth followed at a slower pace. I've been thinking about your suggestion. Jack broke the comfortable silence between them. About running the international division from here. Elizabeth glanced at him, waiting for him to continue. I think it's the right choice. Jack watched his daughter climb confidently on the jungle gym, her laughter carrying across the park. But not just for logistical reasons or for Sophie's stability. Elizabeth's steps slowed, something cautious and hopeful in her expression. No, Jack turned to face her directly, because I don't want to only see you between business trips and video conferences. I want you here, with us. He took her hand, the gesture deliberate and significant. These past months, you've become important to both of us. More important than I ever expected when we got stuck in that elevator. Elizabeth's composure wavered, genuine emotion breaking through the professional mask she'd worn for so many years. I never planned on caring about a maintenance engineer and his daughter. Her voice carried wonder rather than regret, or a neighborhood I was supposed to demolish. But here we are. Here we are, Jack echoed, the simple phrase acknowledging the unlikely journey that had brought them together. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Jack watched his daughter playing and felt for the first time in years that the future held more promise than fear. Sophie waved from the top of the climbing structure, her smile visible even at a distance. Elizabeth waved back, her other hand still entwined with Jack's, the connection between them strengthening with each passing day. Sometimes life's detours, even getting stuck in an elevator, led to unexpected destinations. And sometimes speaking truth to power could change not just a building, but the lives of everyone within it.